On the 17th of October 1940, Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding walked into a room at the Air Ministry in London. He had not been told why he was summoned. No agenda had been provided, no warning given. What he found inside would have unsettled any man. The room was filled with senior officers, air marshals, men of the highest rank in the Royal Air Force, and seated among these generals was someone who should not have been there at all. Squadron leader Douglas Bader, the famous legless ace, a junior officer, a man who held no strategic position whatsoever, a fighter pilot surrounded by the men who commanded entire air forces. Dowding understood immediately. This was not a meeting. This was a trial. And the room, as one witness would later describe it, was stacked against him. The man chairing this gathering was Air Vice Marshal Sholto Douglas. The Chief of the Air Staff had conveniently fallen ill that morning. Douglas had taken his place. What Dowding did not yet know was that Douglas wanted his job, and within weeks he would have it. The subject of discussion was a tactical disagreement, something called the Big Wing controversy. But tactics were merely the excuse. The real purpose of this meeting was to remove the man who had just won the most important air battle in British history. Just 5 weeks earlier, on the 15th of September, the Royal Air Force had broken the back of the Luftwaffe offensive. Adolf Hitler had postponed his invasion of Britain indefinitely. The threat of Nazi occupation, which had seemed almost certain in the summer, was over. Hugh Dowding had commanded Fighter Command through every hour of that crisis. He had built the air defense system that made victory possible. His pilots called him their protector. Winston Churchill called his leadership an example of genius in the art of war. And now he sat in a room full of men who wanted him gone. Lord Beaverbrook, the newspaper baron who served in Churchill's cabinet, would later describe the officers at this meeting with characteristic bluntness. He called them a gang of bloody air marshals. Within 6 weeks, the man who saved Britain would be removed from command. The officers who had conspired against him would take his place. And the tactics they had championed, the very tactics Dowding had rejected, would cost the Royal Air Force over 500 pilots in a single year. This is not a story about the Battle of Britain. That story has been told many times. This is the story of what happened after the victory, when the men who won were punished, and the men who schemed were rewarded. It is a story of genius, betrayal, and the question that haunts military history to this day. And why do institutions so often destroy the very people who saved them? To understand what happened in that room at the Air Ministry, you first need to understand the man they were trying to destroy. Hugh Caswall Tremenheere Dowding was born on the 24th of April, 1882, in the small Scottish town of Moffat. His father, Arthur, ran a boys' preparatory school, and Hugh was born literally inside it. This was not a family of aristocrats or generals. This was a family of schoolmasters. At Winchester College, the young Dowding made his first recorded act of stubborn independence. He joined what was called the Army class, specifically to avoid studying Greek and Latin. He later described these subjects as useless, uninteresting, and annoying. It was an early sign of the man he would become, someone who had no patience for traditions that served no practical purpose. His fellow officers called him Stuffy. No one knows exactly where the nickname came from. It appeared during his early artillery days, long before the Great War, and it stuck for the rest of his life. One historian called it something of an accurate, though affectionate, character assessment. Dowding was reserved. He was aloof. He formalized most of his contacts with other people and had no close friends. His high standards made him impatient with colleagues who failed to understand his reasoning. He had no talent whatsoever for the political games that dominated military life. One of his pilots later captured the paradox perfectly. He said, We admired him more than we loved him, for none of us knew him intimately. And yet, behind that cold exterior was something else entirely. Dowding called his pilots my dear fighter boys. He called them my chicks. When the Air Ministry refused to fit bulletproof windscreens to Spitfires because they were too expensive, Dowding replied, "If Chicago gangsters can have bulletproof glass in their cars, I cannot see any reason why my pilots cannot have the same." The windscreens were installed. There is a story that reveals the man behind the mask. An Air Commodore named Donaldson was caught at a petrol station, slipping a couple of gallons of military fuel into his private car. Dowding appeared. The entire squadron watched, expecting their commanding officer to lose his career on the spot. Instead, all Stuffy said was, "You deserve it, but do not make a habit of it." This complexity, the cold surface hiding fierce protectiveness, had roots in personal tragedy. In 1918, Dowding married an actress named Clarice Maud Van Court. She was full of fun and wanted to be involved in everything. Their son Derek was born in January 1919. For a brief moment, Dowding seemed to have found happiness. Then in June 1920, Clarice was suddenly taken from him after a short illness. She was approximately 35 years old. Derek was 18 months old. Dowding's stepdaughter, Marjorie, later said, "If Mother had lived, I believe he would have enjoyed the social side of life, because she was always so full of fun, but she did not live." And Hugh Dowding withdrew from socializing almost completely. He threw himself into his work. His sister Hilda moved in to help raise Derek. Dowding would not remarry for 31 years. The Stuffy that his colleagues knew, the distant, awkward, emotionally unavailable commander, may not have been his true nature at all. It may have been armor, protection against a loss he could never fully process. Years later, after the war, Dowding expressed one deep regret about his time commanding Fighter Command. He said, "That is the one thing I regret. I knew so few of them personally. The man who saved Britain kept everyone at a distance. It was the only way he knew how to survive. This same quality, this stubborn, isolated, uncompromising nature would serve him brilliantly when building the system that defended his country. He did not need to be liked. He needed to be right. And when the bombs began to fall, being right was all that mattered. But this same quality would also make him vulnerable, because Hugh Dowding had no allies, no political friends, no one in the corridors of power who owed him favors or felt personal loyalty. When his enemies came for him, he would face them alone. In the 1930s, the men who ran Britain's military believed in a simple and terrifying truth. They believed that air defense was impossible. On the 10th of November 1932, Stanley Baldwin, the most powerful politician in Britain, stood before the House of Commons and delivered a speech that would define an era. His words were blunt. He said, "I think it is well for the man in the street to realize that there is no power on earth that can protect him from being bombed. The bomber will always get through. It cannot be done, and there is no expert in Europe who will say that it can." The House of Commons responded with what the Times called a deep and almost emotional round of applause. Baldwin was not exaggerating. He was stating what every military planner in Europe believed to be mathematical fact. Consider the numbers. A German bomber in 1937, a Heinkel 111 or a Dornier 17, flew at speeds between 200 and 270 miles per hour. The distance from the French coast to London was approximately 60 miles. At those speeds, a bomber crossing the English Channel would be over Buckingham Palace in roughly 20 minutes. Now consider what a fighter pilot needed to intercept that bomber. First, someone had to spot the enemy aircraft and report its position. Then the alert had to reach the airfield. Then pilots had to run to their aircraft, start their engines, take off, and climbed to 20,000 feet, the altitude where bombers operated. The minimum time for all of this was 14 to 16 minutes. Under perfect conditions, 20 minutes for the bomber to reach London, 14 to 16 minutes for the fighter to get airborne and climb to altitude. That left, at most, 4 to 6 minutes to actually find and engage the enemy. But there was a deeper problem. Those 14 minutes assumed you knew the bombers were coming the moment they crossed the coastline, and Britain had no way of knowing that. The Observer Corps, 30,000 volunteers watching the skies from 1,000 posts across southern England, could only report aircraft after they had already entered British airspace. On cloudy days or at night, enemy aircraft could cross the entire country without being seen at all. Britain tried other solutions. Along the Kent coast, engineers built massive concrete structures called acoustic mirrors, giant dishes, and curved walls designed to detect the sound of approaching aircraft engines. The largest was a 200-foot wall at Dungeness. In perfect conditions, these sound mirrors could detect bombers at 15 to 30 miles and provide perhaps 15 minutes of warning. But conditions were rarely perfect. In poor weather, detection range dropped to as little as 5 miles, and as aircraft became faster, sound detection became useless. By the time you heard the engines, the bombs were already falling. Anti-aircraft guns offered little comfort. In September 1940, British gunners would fire 30,000 shells for every enemy aircraft they brought down. Searchlights had approximately a 1% chance of finding their target without assistance. The proof of failure came in the summer of 1934. The Royal Air Force conducted large-scale exercises with 350 aircraft, half of them bombers approaching London, half of them fighters trying to stop them. The results were so dismal that commanders decided to give the fighter controllers complete information about where the bombers were before the exercise even began. It made no difference. Even with perfect intelligence, 70% of the bombers reached London without seeing a single British fighter. 70%. With cheating. This was not theory. This was demonstrated fact. The Royal Air Force drew the logical conclusion: if bombers could not be stopped, then Britain's only hope was to have more bombers than the enemy. The man who built the RAF, Hugh Trenchard, the father of the Royal Air Force, believed that offensive bombing was the only viable strategy. He said, "The moral effect of bombing outweighs the material effect by a factor of 20 to 1. The 1923 expansion plan allocated 39 bomber squadrons against only 13 fighter squadrons, a ratio of 3 to 1. Resources poured into building bombers. Fighters were neglected. Because what was the point of weapons that could not defend you?" Meanwhile, across the Channel, Germany was building the Luftwaffe. Hermann Göring, the former fighter ace who now commanded Hitler's Air Force, assembled a fleet of over 1,000 bombers by 1939. The Heinkel 111 could carry 4,400 pounds of bombs to targets over 1,000 miles away. The Junkers 88 was specifically designed to fly so fast that fighters could not catch it. British planners calculated the consequences. Using casualty rates from the Great War, they predicted that a 60-day German bombing campaign would produce 600,000 British civilians gone and 1.2 million wounded. London hospitals prepared for 300,000 casualties in the first week alone. Harold Macmillan, the future Prime Minister, later said it plainly: "We thought of air warfare in 1938 rather as people think of nuclear warfare today. Britain faced extinction from the sky, and there was nothing that conventional military thinking could do about it. To defend Britain, someone would have to solve an impossible problem. Someone would have to find a way to see the invisible, to know where enemy aircraft were before they crossed the coastline, with enough time to get fighters into position. Someone would have to invent a way to see through clouds, through darkness, across hundreds of miles of open water. In 1935, that someone appeared. On the 26th of February 1935, two men stood in a muddy field near the village of Daventry in the English Midlands. One was Robert Watson Watt, a Scottish physicist working for the National Physical Laboratory. The other was his assistant, Arnold Wilkins. They had come to test an idea that sounded like science fiction. A few miles away stood a BBC radio transmitter, broadcasting its signal across the countryside. High above, a Royal Air Force Hayford bomber flew back and forth in a predetermined pattern. Watson, Watt and Wilkins watched a cathode ray tube connected to a simple radio receiver. As the bomber passed through the BBC radio beam, something appeared on the screen. A blip, a deflection. The radio waves were bouncing off the aircraft and returning to Earth. They detected the bomber at a distance of 8 miles. It was not much. 8 miles gave perhaps 2 or 3 minutes of warning, not nearly enough to scramble fighters. But it was proof that radio waves could detect aircraft, proof that the invisible could be made visible. The next day, a man named Hugh Dowding made a decision that would change history. Dowding was then serving as air member for supply and research, responsible for the development of new technologies for the Royal Air Force. He had attended a preliminary briefing about Watson Watt's work. Other officials were skeptical. The technology was primitive. The ranges were short. There were 1,000 problems to solve. Dowding did not care about the problems. He cared about the potential. Within 24 hours, he released £10,000 to continue the research. By December of that year, he had secured Treasury approval for £60,000 to build 5 experimental stations protecting the Thames estuary. The development was astonishing. In June 1935, detection range reached 16 miles. By July, 40 miles. By the end of the year, 80 miles. By 1936, over 120 miles. Watson Watt had a philosophy that Dowding embraced completely. He called it the cult of the imperfect. Give them the third best to go on with, he said. The second best comes too late. The best never comes. Do not wait for perfection. Build what works now. By the summer of 1940, Britain possessed something that existed nowhere else on Earth. A chain of radar stations stretching from Scotland to the Isle of Wight, 21 main chain home stations, and 30 chain home low stations for detecting aircraft flying below 5,000 feet. The transmitter towers rose 360 feet into the sky, taller than the Statue of Liberty. The wooden receiver towers stood 240 feet tall. They were impossible to hide and impossible to miss. But Dowding understood something that no one else seemed to grasp. Radar was only the beginning. Radar gave you eyes, but eyes without a brain are useless. What good was it to detect 100 aircraft over the channel if no one knew what to do with that information? What good was early warning if the warning never reached the pilots who needed it? Dowding built the brain. At Fighter Command Headquarters in Bentley Priory, in a bunker 42 feet underground, he created the filter room. This was where chaos became clarity. Radar stations sent conflicting reports. Multiple stations detected the same aircraft and gave different positions. Atmospheric conditions created false echoes. The filter room took all of this noise and produced a single coherent picture of reality. Women of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, the WAAFs, sat at enormous map tables, receiving coordinates through headphones, placing colored counters to represent each detected formation. Above them on a balcony, controllers watched the picture develop. They had approximately 4 minutes to decide whether each contact was friendly, hostile, or a ghost. A color clock on the wall marked time in 5-minute segments: red, yellow, blue. Each plot marker matched the current clock color. After 15 minutes, old plots were removed. The picture was always current, always alive. From the filter room, information flowed to group headquarters and then to individual sector stations. Each level had its own operations room, with its own plotting table showing the tactical picture for that area. Controllers could see exactly where enemy formations were heading and exactly which squadrons were available to meet them. On the wall of each operations room hung the tote board, an electronic display showing the status of every squadron in real time. Colored lights indicated whether a squadron was released, available at readiness, or already airborne. Time indicators showed how long each squadron had been flying, which meant controllers knew exactly how much fuel remained in every aircraft under their command. But radar faced seaward. Once enemy aircraft crossed the coastline, the great towers were blind. For tracking over land, Dowding relied on the Observer Corps, 30,000 volunteers at 1,000 posts across Britain, watching the skies with binoculars and reporting by telephone. Without them, as one curator at the Imperial War Museum noted, there would have been absolutely no way to track aircraft once they crossed the coast. The system was tested at Biggin Hill in 1936. The results silenced every critic. When controllers knew the altitude of incoming aircraft, when they could vector fighters to the precise height of the enemy, interception rates exceeded 90%. 90%. Compared to 30% before radar, compared to the 70% of bombers that had reached London unopposed in 1934. The mathematics of air defense had been completely rewritten. Here is what makes this story remarkable. Hugh Dowding did not invent radar. Watson Watt and his team did that. Dowding did not design the filter rooms or the plotting tables. Teams of engineers and scientists did that. What Dowding did was something more important. He saw how all the pieces fit together. He understood that technology alone was meaningless, that radar without communications was useless, that communications without trained personnel was pointless, that the whole system had to work as a single organism, from the radar towers on the coast to the pilots in their cockpits. He built the world's first integrated air defense network, a system that took information from dozens of sources, processed it in real time, and delivered it to the people who needed it, all within minutes. No other country had anything like it. Germany possessed radar technology. Their Freya system actually operated at higher frequencies with better resolution than Chain Home. In December 1939, Freya detected a British bomber raid on Wilhelmshaven at a range of 113 kilometers. German controllers had a full hour of warning. Over 100 Luftwaffe fighters scrambled to intercept. Fewer than half of them found the bombers. The technology was superior, the system was non-existent, Germany had better eyes, Britain had a brain, and in the summer of 1940, that difference would determine the fate of civilization. May 1940. France is collapsing. German panzer divisions have punched through the Ardennes and are racing toward the English Channel. The French army, the largest in Europe, is falling apart. Allied forces are being pushed back toward the sea. The French government sends desperate appeals to London. Send us fighters. Send us Hurricanes and Spitfires. Without British air support, France will fall. Winston Churchill, Prime Minister for barely a week, wants to help. France is Britain's oldest ally. If France falls, Britain stands alone. The War Cabinet presses for action. Surely we must do something. Squadron after squadron is ordered across the Channel. By mid-May, Fighter Command has already lost the equivalent of 6 full squadrons, nearly 100 aircraft. The Air Ministry estimates that 52 squadrons are needed for home defence. Dowding now has only 36. On the 16th of May, Hugh Dowding does something Extraordinary. He writes a letter directly to the Air Ministry, and he does not mince words. If the Home Defence Force is drained away in desperate attempts to remedy the situation in France, he writes, defeat in France will involve the final, complete, and irremediable defeat of this country. He continues, I must therefore request that as a matter of paramount urgency, the Air Ministry will consider and decide what level of strength is to be left to fighter command for the defence of this country, and will assure me that when this level has been reached, not one fighter will be sent across the Channel, however urgent and insistent the appeals for help may be. Not one fighter, however urgent the appeals. This was not a suggestion. This was an ultimatum from a serving officer to his political masters. In military terms, it was borderline insubordination. 3 days later, Churchill cancelled the order to send more squadrons to France. Dowding later said that the return of those fighters converted a desperate situation into a serious situation. Without them, he implied, Britain would have had nothing left to fight with when the Luftwaffe turned its attention across the Channel. Dowding had saved the fighters that would save Britain, but he had also made a powerful enemy. Churchill never forgot that Dowding had opposed him, had swayed the cabinet against the Prime Minister's own wishes. The two men would never be close, and when the time came for Dowding's enemies to move against him, Churchill would not stand in their way. The Battle of Britain began on the 10th of July, 1940. It would last 114 days. Phase 1, Kanalkampf. The Luftwaffe attacks British convoys in the English Channel. The goal is simple: lure RAF fighters into combat over water, where downed pilots cannot be rescued. Dowding refuses to take the bait in force. He sends just enough fighters to defend, never more. His critics call him passive. He calls it mathematics. Phase 2, Adlerangriff, Eagle attack. On the 12th of August, the Luftwaffe strikes the radar stations. 4 chain-home towers are hit. 3 go silent. For 6 terrifying hours, Britain is blind. Then the stations come back online. Crews work through fires and bomb craters. The Germans conclude that radar installations are too difficult to destroy permanently. They abandon the attacks. It is a catastrophic mistake. Phase 3, the crisis. From the 24th of August to the 6th of September, the Luftwaffe systematically destroys fighter commands, airfields, hangars burn, runways crater, operations rooms collapse. The 31st of August is the worst day of the battle. 39 aircraft lost, 14 pilots gone. The next day, 14 more aircraft and more pilots. On the 3rd of September, Dowding reports to Churchill, 25% of all fighter pilots have been lost since the battle began. The survivors are exhausted. Some squadrons exist only on paper. Fighter command is breaking. Then Hitler makes a mistake. On the night of the 24th of August, German bombers accidentally hit central London. Churchill orders a retaliatory raid on Berlin. The damage is minimal. But Hitler is enraged. He orders the Luftwaffe to abandon the airfields and destroy London instead. On the 7th of September, 300 bombers appear over the London docks. The East End burns. Civilians perish by the hundreds, but the airfields get a chance to breathe. The 15th of September, the day the Germans throw everything they have at London. Churchill visits the Uxbridge bunker to watch the battle unfold. On the tote board, light after light turns red. Every squadron is airborne, every reserve committed. Churchill turns to Air Vice Marshal Park. What other reserves have we? Park answers, there are none. For 15 minutes, nothing stands between London and the Luftwaffe except pilots already in combat, running low on fuel and ammunition. The Germans turn back. 2 days later, Hitler postpones Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain, indefinitely. Britain had survived. The system had held. But while Dowding was fighting the Luftwaffe in the sky. Other men were fighting him in the corridors of power. While Dowding fought the Luftwaffe, other men were fighting him. Trafford Leigh-Mallory commanded 12 Group, the squadrons covering the Midlands and the North. His role was secondary. The glory belonged to 11 Group under Keith Park, defending London and the South East. Leigh-Mallory wanted more. In February 1940, months before the battle even began, Leigh-Mallory quarrelled with Park. Afterward, he made a promise: "I will move heaven and earth to get Dowding sacked." Park kept this secret for 28 years. Behind Leigh-Mallory stood a more dangerous figure. Sholto Douglas, Deputy Chief of Air Staff, worked in the shadows. Records show almost no telephone contact between Leigh-Mallory and Dowding during the battle. Between Leigh-Mallory and Douglas, constant communication. Their weapon was a pilot named Douglas Bader. Bader was a legend, the man who had lost both legs in a flying accident and returned to combat through sheer will. He commanded 242 Squadron at Duxford, part of 12 Group, and he was frustrated. While Park's pilots fought over Kent, Bader sat waiting for calls that rarely came. Bader promoted a tactic called Big Wing. Instead of sending squadrons piecemeal, gather 3 to 5 squadrons, 36 to 60 aircraft, into a single massive formation before engaging the enemy. It sounded aggressive. It sounded decisive. Politicians loved it. There was one problem. Assembly took 15 to 25 minutes. By the time a big wing formed up and reached the combat zone, German bombers had already hit their targets and turned for home. Park had tried large formations over Dunkirk. His assessment are inflexible and difficult to control. The evidence supported Park. In November 1940, an Air Ministry report examined big wing performance. 10 interceptions, 1 enemy aircraft destroyed. But the overclaims told a different story. On the 15th of September, big wing pilots claimed 52 aircraft destroyed. Actual German losses that day from big wing attacks, 6, a ratio of nearly 7 to 1. Bader's adjutant was a member of Parliament named Peter MacDonald. Through him, the big wing controversy reached Churchill directly, bypassing Dowding, bypassing the Air Ministry, bypassing the entire chain of command. Dowding later said that Bader was the gruesome cause of a lot of trouble, but Bader was a pawn, brave, skilled, and utterly manipulated. The real players never stepped into the light. Remember that room at the Air Ministry. Now you understand who was in it. The 17th of October 1940, 5 weeks after the 15th of September, the day Dowding System stopped the Luftwaffe. 5 weeks after Hitler postponed the invasion. The Battle of Britain is effectively won. Hugh Dowding receives a summons to the Air Ministry. He is not told the purpose of the meeting. He is not given an agenda. He walks into a room full of air marshals, and sitting among them, squadron leader Douglas Bader, a man 4 ranks below everyone else in the room, a man who has no business being there at all. Chief of Air Staff Cyril Newall is conspicuously absent, conveniently ill. The meeting is chaired by Sholto Douglas, the man who's been working against Dowding for months, the man who will take Dowding's job. Lord Beaverbrook will later call this gathering a meeting of bloody air marshals. The room was stacked. Leigh-Mallory presents his case for Big Wing. He claims his formations can assemble in 6 minutes. 6 minutes, when all summer long they had taken 15, 20, 25 minutes to form up. No one challenges him. No one asks why the mathematics suddenly changed. Keith Park, the man who actually commanded the battle over London, tries to present evidence. He has prepared detailed counter-arguments showing that Big Wing arrived late to nearly every engagement, showing that the kill claims were wildly exaggerated. The Air Ministry refuses to include his statement in the official minutes. Dowding sits through the meeting in near silence. He has spent the last 4 months saving his country. Now he watches his subordinate commanders, men who were supposed to support him, testify against his methods in front of men who have already decided his fate. This was not a discussion. This was not a debate. This was a trial, and the verdict was written before it began. Keith Park understood exactly what had happened. Years later, he said it plainly. The meeting was Dowding's death warrant. Big Wing was merely the excuse. Within 6 weeks, both men would be gone. The 24th of November, 1940. 24 days since the official end of the Battle of Britain. 70 days since Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The threat of invasion had passed. Britain was safe. On that day, Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding surrendered command of Fighter Command. There was no ceremony, no farewell parade, no speech of gratitude from the government he had saved, no acknowledgement from the Air Ministry that this man had just won the most important air battle in history. Staff at Bentley Priory received orders to vacate their offices within 48 hours. 48 hours? As if Dowding were a disgraced officer being court-martialed, not the architect of victory. One account captures the moment perfectly. Dowding, in his usual fashion, said nothing. He simply disappeared. The man who had built the system from nothing. The man who had fought for every Spitfire and Hurricane when the Air Ministry wanted bombers. The man who had stood before Churchill and the War Cabinet and refused to sacrifice his fighters in a lost cause. The man whose dear fighter boys, his chicks, had held the line when civilization itself hung in the balance. He simply disappeared. This was not even the first humiliation. Throughout 1940, Dowding's retirement had been postponed and extended 4 separate times, each time leaving him uncertain whether he would still have a command the following month. The Air Ministry had been trying to remove him even before the battle began. Only the German attack had made his dismissal temporarily impossible. Now that the crisis had passed, they finished what they had started. The next day, the 25th of November, Keith Park was removed from command of 11 Group, the man who had directed every fighter over London during the battle, the man whose tactical decisions on the 15th of September had broken the Luftwaffe's offensive, the man who had scrambled his squadrons at precisely the right moments, in precisely the right numbers, day after day for 4 months, gone without explanation, without thanks, without even the courtesy of a proper handover. And who replaced them? Sholto Douglas, the man who had chaired the October meeting, the man who had maintained constant contact with Lee Mallory throughout the battle, the man who had worked behind the scenes to undermine Dowding for months, took Dowding's position as Commander-in-Chief of Fighter Command. Trafford Lee Mallory, the man who had promised in February to move heaven and earth to get Dowding sacked, took Park's position commanding 11 Group, the most important tactical command in Fighter Command, the job he had coveted all along. The prosecutors became the judges became the executioners, and the executioners inherited the kingdom. This was not a change of strategy. This was a coup carried out in plain sight. Churchill, the Prime Minister whom Dowding had defied over France, the man who had called Dowding one of the very best men, did nothing to stop it. Years later, he admitted that the dismissal broke his heart. But in November 1940, he signed the papers and let it happen. The Air Ministry sent Dowding to America on a diplomatic mission, a role for which the awkward reserve commander was spectacularly unsuited. It was exile dressed as an honor. The new commanders immediately implemented the tactics they had championed. Big Wing became official doctrine, massed formations, aggressive sweeps over occupied France, everything Dowding and Park had argued against. The results would speak for themselves. The new commanders got their chance to prove themselves. The results were catastrophic. Sholto Douglas and Lee Mallory implemented Big Wing as official fighter command doctrine. They launched aggressive operations over occupied France, fighter sweeps designed to draw the Luftwaffe into battle. They called them circus operations. The theory was simple: mass British fighters over France, force the Germans to fight, destroy the Luftwaffe in the air. The reality was slaughter. In 1941, Fighter Command lost over 500 pilots in these operations. The exchange rate was devastating: 4 British aircraft destroyed for every German. The tactics that Dowding and Park had rejected were proving exactly as costly as they had warned. In January 1941, barely 2 months after taking command, Lee Mallory participated in war games, simulating a German attack on Britain. He applied big-wing tactics to the defense. His squadrons took too long to assemble. They failed to intercept the incoming raids. In the simulation, 2 major airfields were destroyed. The very tactics used to condemn Dowding failed their first theoretical test under controlled conditions. The men who had demanded big wing could not make it work even in a game. The author Len Dayton would later write, "The RAF leadership treated Dowding and Park more vindictively for winning the Battle of Britain than Göring treated his losing Luftwaffe generals." And what of Dowding himself? The Air Ministry sent him to America on a diplomatic mission, purchasing aircraft and building relations with American manufacturers. It was a role for which the reserved, socially awkward commander was utterly unsuited. Diplomacy required charm, political skill, ease with strangers. Dowding had none of these. He learned of his final retirement from the newspapers. The Air Ministry denied him the rank of Marshal of the Royal Air Force, the highest rank in the service. It was an honor later given to Sholto Douglas. It was given to Arthur Harris, the man who led Bomber Command. It was never given to the man who won the Battle of Britain. Harris himself understood the injustice. He said of Dowding, "He is the only commander who won one of the decisive battles of history and got sacked for his pains." The establishment had erased Dowding from the story of his own victory, but history has a way of correcting mistakes, sometimes with brutal irony. History has a sense of justice, and sometimes a sense of irony. In 1943, Hugh Dowding received a barony, becoming Baron Dowding of Bentley Priory. In 1951, he married Muriel Whiting, a widow who shared his spiritualist beliefs. He wrote books about the afterlife. He campaigned for animal rights. He became a vegetarian. At a Battle of Britain memorial service, he reportedly told a minister that he could feel the spirits of his lost boys around him. One former pilot commented, "At that stage we thought Stuffy had gone a bit gaga." But perhaps it was simply grief. The grief of a man who had sent young men to their fate and never stopped counting the cost. In 1969, the film Battle of Britain premiered. Laurence Olivier played Dowding. The 86-year-old commander, now confined to a wheelchair, visited the set. Olivier approached him nervously. "I have been sitting at your desk all day, pretending to be you," he said, "and making a terrible hash of it." Dowding replied, "Oh, I am sure you are." On the 15th of February, 1970, Hugh Dowding passed away at the age of 87. His ashes rest beneath the Battle of Britain memorial window in Westminster Abbey. And what of his enemies? November 1944. Trafford Lee Mallory, the man who had sworn to move heaven and earth to destroy Dowding and Park, perished in a plane crash en route to his new command in Southeast Asia. His replacement, Keith Park. On the 20th of October 1988, a statue of Dowding was unveiled outside St. Clement Danes, the church of the Royal Air Force. The Queen Mother removed the covering. The statue was not paid for by the government, not by the RAF. £60,000 were raised by ordinary people. The inscription reads, "To him the people of Britain and of the free world owe largely the way of life and the liberties they enjoy today. Churchill himself was furious when the official history of the battle omitted Dowding. He demanded what would be said if the Admiralty told the tale of Trafalgar and left Lord Nelson out of it. The institutions forgot. The people remembered,